I still remember the moment I realized I had become invisible. It was not during an argument. It was not after a harsh word. It was a quiet evening, the kind that looks ordinary from the outside. My husband was laughing. He was sitting across the room, his phone in his hand, smiling at something someone had sent him. The light from the screen reflected on his face, making him look younger somehow. Lighter. I was standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot that did not really need stirring anymore. And suddenly it hit me. He was happy, comfortable, at ease. And I was nowhere in that happiness. I did not cry. I did not feel angry. I felt absent, like a chair that had always been there, quietly holding weight, until one day no one noticed it anymore. That was the day I understood something painful. My husband was enjoying a life that had been built on my silence. When we first met, I was not a quiet woman. I had opinions, dreams, plans that reached beyond the walls of any house. I spoke easily. I laughed loudly. I believed love meant walking side by side, matching each other's steps. He loved that about me, or at least I thought he did. "You're strong," he used to say. I admire that. I believed him. In the early years of our marriage, we were a team. When something went wrong, we talked. When decisions needed to be made, we made them together. Or so it seemed. Slowly, so slowly, I did not notice at first, the balance shifted. Not because he demanded it, but because I offered. The first silence came when he got a job in another city. "It's a great opportunity," he said. "It won't be easy, but it's good for us." I had just started finding my footing in my own work. It was not perfect, but it was mine.
"We can manage," I said.
I can step back. For a while, that was the first brick I laid. Then came the longer hours. "I'll be late tonight. Tomorrow will be worse," I adjusted. I waited. I filled the quiet with chores, with planning, with understanding. I told myself this was what love looked like. When people asked how I was doing, I smiled. "He works so hard," I said proudly. "We're building something."
And we were.
But only one of us was being seen while building it. Over time, I stopped bringing up small hurts. They did not seem worth it. Why mention that he forgot to ask how my day was? Why point out that he made plans without telling me? So I stayed silent. I told myself peace was more important than being right. Silence has a strange way of becoming a habit. At first, it feels like kindness. Then it feels like patience. Eventually, it feels like survival. I learned to swallow words before they reached my mouth. I learned to nod instead of question. I learned to smile, even when I felt unseen. Our home became efficient. Meals appeared on time. Laundry was done. Appointments were remembered. He never had to worry. And because he never had to worry, he never had to look closely. There were moments I almost spoke. Like the night I waited up for him, dinner cold, heart hopeful. "I already ate," he said, distracted. "I thought you knew." I wanted to say, "I waited because I matter too." Instead, I said, "It's okay." And just like that, another brick was laid. I did not realize how quiet I had become until someone else pointed it out. A woman I barely knew said to me once, "You're so calm. You don't complain at all." I smiled politely. Inside, something whispered, "That's not calm. That's silence." My husband began to shine. At work events, people praised him. At gatherings, they admired his stability. "He's lucky," someone said once. "He has such a supportive wife." They said it like it was a compliment. I said thank you. But support, when it is one-sided for too long, turns into disappearance. And I was slowly disappearing. I started to notice how often he spoke over me. Not rudely. Not intentionally. Just naturally, as if my voice had faded into background noise. If I corrected him, he looked surprised. "Oh," he'd say, "I didn't know you felt that way." Of course he didn't. I had trained him not to. At night, lying beside him, I listened to his steady breathing. I wondered when he stopped asking what I thought. When he stopped checking if I was okay. Or maybe he never stopped. Maybe I just stopped answering honestly. The hardest part was this. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't mean. He was comfortable. and comfort can be more dangerous than anger. I watched him enjoy the life we built. The clean house, the smooth routines, the quiet support that never asked for anything back. And I realized something that scared me. My silence had made everything easier for him. Too easy. That was the beginning. The moment before the cracks became visible. Before the silence grew heavy. Before I had to face a question I was afraid to ask. If I stopped being silent, would there still be room for me in his life? After that evening, nothing changed on the surface. The house still smelled of morning coffee. The door still opened and closed the same way. My husband still kissed my forehead before leaving for work. If someone had walked past our window, they would have seen a normal home. But inside me, something had begun to ache. I started noticing how often my silence was assumed. Not requested. Not appreciated. Just expected. If he changed plans, he did not explain. If he made decisions, he did not ask. And if I looked surprised, he would say, "I thought you'd be fine with it." I almost always was. Or at least I said I was. One afternoon, he told me he had invited his colleagues over for dinner. "Tonight?" I asked. "Yes," he said, already walking toward the bedroom. "You're great at hosting." It was meant as praise. I stood in the kitchen for a long moment after he left the room. Not angry, just tired. As I cooked that evening, I moved automatically. Chop, stir, wipe. My body remembered what to do, even when my heart felt distant. During dinner, they laughed and talked about work. My husband shone in the middle of it all. Someone turned to me and said, "You're lucky. He's doing so well." I smiled. Luck had nothing to do with it. After everyone left, my husband sat back, satisfied. "That went well," he said. "You didn't say much tonight." He did not mean it as a complaint. He meant it as comfort. Another brick. The small moments kept adding up. He interrupted me to finish my sentences. He answered questions meant for me. He made jokes about how easygoing I was. People admired it. I felt smaller each time. Once I tried to speak. It was about something small. A weekend plan. A feeling I could not quite name. I began. He looked at his phone. "Can we talk about this later?" Later never came. I learned something then. Silence teaches people what they can get away with. Not because they are bad, but because they are human. I started keeping my thoughts to myself. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it was patience. But patience that only goes one way becomes loneliness. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked calm, put together. But my eyes looked like they were waiting for something. I did not know what anymore. My husband began talking more about his future, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to achieve. He used the word I often. I listened. I nodded. He did not notice I had stopped hearing myself in his plans. There was a day I felt especially tired. Not physically, but in a deeper place. "I'm overwhelmed," I said softly while we ate dinner. He looked up surprised. "With what?" he asked. "You don't really have stress like I do." The words were not sharp. They were worse. They were dismissive. I smiled. Of course I did. And the silence grew heavier. That night, I lay awake thinking about all the times I had said, "It's fine. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about me." I realized something painful. I had taught him how to forget me. The house felt different then. Still clean. Still quiet. But not warm. Like a place where feelings were neatly stored away, never opened. I watched my husband enjoy his life. The ease. The praise. The comfort. And I wondered what would happen if I stopped holding everything steady. If I stopped being the quiet support. If I finally spoke. I did not know it yet, but that question was already changing me. Because once you see your silence clearly, you cannot pretend it is love anymore. There is a strange kind of pain that comes from being present, yet feeling absent. I was in the room. I heard every word. I answered every question. And still, I felt invisible. It began with small things. He would tell stories about his day, and I would listen carefully. When I shared mine, his eyes drifted to his phone. Not intentionally. Not cruelly. Just habit. One evening, I mentioned something that mattered to me. I've been thinking about taking a class, I said. Something just for me. He nodded, distracted. That's nice, he replied. You'll see. The conversation ended there.
No curiosity.
No questions. Just dismissal wrapped in politeness. I started to notice how rarely he asked me how I was. Not, did you eat? Not, are you tired? But how I was. When he did ask, it was usually while multitasking. And my answers became shorter.
Fine.
Okay. Nothing much. Because explaining how I felt required energy I no longer had. There were days I dressed a little nicer. Not for attention.
Just to feel like myself again.
He did not notice. Not once. I stopped sharing my worries. Stopped talking about my dreams. Stopped expecting comfort. When something good happened, I celebrated quietly. When something hurt, I swallowed it whole. Silence became my language. One afternoon, I watched couples walking together in the park. They talked.
They laughed.
They leaned toward each other. I wondered when my marriage had turned into parallel lives moving in the same direction without touching. The hardest part was not what he did. It was what he did not do.
He did not ask.
He did not check. He did not notice the change. And that absence felt louder than any argument. Once, I tried again. I feel like we don't talk anymore, I said.
He sighed.
We talk all the time, he replied. You're overthinking. The conversation ended there. Because how do you explain loneliness to someone who thinks everything is fine? That night, I cried silently. Not because of a fight, but because I realized something terrifying. I was lonely in my own marriage. Days passed. Weeks. I functioned well. Meals were cooked. Laundry was done. Smiles were given. From the outside, nothing looked broken. Inside, I felt hollow. I began to disappear slowly. Not physically. Emotionally. I became the background noise of his life. Reliable. Predictable. Unquestioned. One morning, he forgot something important. Something I had reminded him about more than once. When it caused a problem, he snapped. Why didn't you tell me again? I looked at him, stunned.
I had.
But it did not matter. Because hearing requires attention, that was the moment something shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I stopped trying to be heard. I stopped repeating myself. I stopped explaining. Because begging for presence hurts more than being ignored. I started journaling at night, writing things I could not say.
Questions I was afraid to ask.
Feelings I had buried too long. On paper, I existed again. I realized then, being invisible is not the same as being alone. It is worse. Because someone is right there, yet you are unseen. I still loved. My husband. That was the hardest truth. Love does not disappear just because it is neglected. It only becomes heavier. And somewhere deep inside me, a thought formed. Quiet. Dangerous. What if this is not all I am meant to be? I did not know the answer yet. But once the question appears, it never leaves. I did not plan for it to happen that day. There was no warning. No argument waiting in the air. It was an ordinary morning. The kind that looks harmless until it changes your life. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I stood in the kitchen, stirring tea that had already gone cold. He was getting ready for work, rushing as always.
Keys. Phone.
Wallet. His world moved fast now. As he passed by, he said casually, My colleagues are coming over this weekend. I looked up. When did you decide that? Yesterday, he replied. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. I asked softly. Did you think to ask me?
He stopped.
Looked at me, confused. Why would I? He said. You're home anyway. That sentence landed quietly. But it cracked something open. You're home anyway. Not my home. Not our space. Just a place I existed in. I felt my chest tighten. Years of swallowed words pressed against my throat. I tried to stay calm. I would have liked to know, I said. So, I could prepare, or at least feel included. He sighed, frustrated. You're making things complicated again, he said. Why do you always do this always? As if asking to be seen was a flaw. Something inside me finally stood up. Not anger, not rage, just truth. I don't do this always, I said quietly. I do this because I feel invisible. He laughed softly, shaking his head. You're imagining things, he said. You have everything. Everything. Except myself. I looked at him then. Really looked. The man I had supported, encouraged, waited for. The man whose dreams I carried on my back. And suddenly, I felt very tired. Do you remember? I asked. When I stayed awake all night, helping you prepare for your interview. He frowned. That was years ago. Yes, I said. And I was there for everyone after that too. He shrugged. That's what partners do. Partners. But only one of us seemed to remember. I felt tears rise, but I did not let them fall. Not this time. I gave up my job when we moved. I continued. I supported your long hours, your stress, your silence. He crossed his arms. So now you're blaming me? No, I said gently. I'm telling you I'm hurting. There was a long pause. He checked his watch. I don't have time for this right now, he said. We'll talk later. Later. That word had followed me for years. As he walked out, the door closed softly behind him.
No Islam.
No drama. Just finality. I stood there alone. And for the first time, I did not cry. Something inside me felt clear. Painful, but clear. I sat at the dining table and opened my journal. My hands were steady. I wrote one sentence. I am tired of disappearing. That afternoon, I did something I had not done in years. I went out alone.
No items.
No purpose. Just me. I walked slowly, observed faces, listened to my own breath. I realized how long it had been since I checked in with myself. I sat in a small cafe, ordered tea, watched rain tap against the window. And there, surrounded by strangers, I felt more seen than I had at home. I asked myself hard questions. Who am I when no one needs me? Who am I beyond support and sacrifice?
I did not know yet.
But I wanted to find out. That evening, he came home late.
Guests were discussed.
Plans were made. I listened quietly. Not because I agreed, but because I was choosing my moment. When night fell and the house grew still, I said calmly, "We need to talk." He looked surprised, annoyed, but he sat down. "I love you," I said, "but I don't feel valued." He opened his mouth to interrupt. I raised my hand gently. "Please let me finish." I spoke slowly, about the years, the silence, the way I had made myself small. I did not accuse. I did not shout. I simply told the truth. When I finished, there was silence. Heavy, uncomfortable. He finally spoke. "I didn't know you felt this way." And I realized something heartbreaking. He truly didn't. Not because he didn't care, but because he never had to notice. That night, I went to bed knowing something had changed. Not everything. Not yet. But the silence was broken. And once silence breaks, it never goes back the same way. The days after that conversation were not dramatic. There were no loud apologies. No sudden change. Just space. A careful silence that felt different from before. He watched me more. Not closely. Not with concern. But with awareness. As if he was seeing something he had missed for years. I did not rush him. For once, I did not rush myself either. I stopped explaining my feelings over and over. I stopped shrinking to keep peace. I let my words sit where they had landed. Some evenings, we ate dinner quietly. The table felt larger. The air felt heavier. But I reminded myself something important. Silence is not always loss. Sometimes it is healing beginning. One night he spoke. Not defensively. Not distracted. He said, "I didn't realize how much you gave up." His voice was low, almost unsure. I listened. Not to respond, but to understand. "I thought you were happy." He continued. "You never complained." I nodded slowly. "I was quiet," I said. That's not the same thing. That was the moment. The moment he truly heard me. Change did not come all at once. It came in small, careful steps. He started asking before making plans. He paused when I spoke. He noticed when I was tired. And I changed too. I stopped waiting to be asked. I stopped hiding my needs behind smiles. I spoke gently but clearly. We were learning each other again. Not as roles, but as people. There were still difficult days. Moments when old habits returned. But now I no longer swallowed my hurt. I named it.
Calmly.
Honestly, one afternoon, I found an old photo.
It was of me.
Younger. Standing beside him. Smiling brightly. I studied that woman. I realized something tender.
She wasn't weak.
She was generous. And generosity deserves respect. I did not regret my sacrifices. They came from love. But I learned this truth slowly. Love should not require silence. I began doing small things for myself. Morning walks, writing again, sitting by the window with tea, and no guilt. I felt myself returning, piece by piece. One evening, he said something that stayed with me. I don't want to build my life without you anymore. Not perfect words, but honest ones. I smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because we were finally facing the same direction. If you are listening to this and you feel unseen, if your love has become quiet to survive, please remember this. Your silence may have built a life, but your voice can save your soul. Speak gently,
But speak.
you deserve to be heard in the life you helped create. And sometimes the bravest thing we do is stop disappearing.